D&D is a tabletop RPG game that has existed for a really long time, since the 70s. And I'm here to tell you what it's about, why I love it so much, what I may not love about it so much, and why it's completely taken over all of my free time. So let's get into it. D&D is a tabletop role-playing game, or TTRPG for short, in which you can have a group of players and one game master, often referred to as a dungeon master, that sets up the world and describes it to the players, and the players have choices in which they interact with the world. They can speak with non-playable characters or NPCs. Your players can fight monsters and investigate areas and solve mysteries and go on adventures and things like that. In a world that either you make yourself and create all from the top of your head, or in a world that's already pre-designed for you by Dungeons and Dragons. Wizards of the Coast make uh, like module books in which they make settings, monsters, classes, and subclasses. But that's for another video. What I want to talk to you about is the generalization of it, right? The general gameplay and mechanics that are in every D&D game, no matter what module you're playing, who you play as, and anything like that. So, Dungeons and Dragons often starts with your DM or dungeon master describing the area in which you're in. They describe the people you see, the happenings about in the area that you're in. So, for example, they describe a bustling town square in a large city, and they may describe the shops that you see, the people that you see running those shops, the civilian population that is meandering around the place. And you, as the player, can decide who you want to talk to, who you want to avoid, what shops you want to go into, whether you buy anything from those shops, things like that. Um, and that's, I think, really interesting because it doesn't have how most video games or most forms of entertainment now will have a very linear way in which you can interact with things. Even open world games nowadays have a very linear way of how they want you to do things and how you're expected to do things. Dungeons and Dragons is completely up to you how you play it, and it's completely up to you how you interact with the world. You can just simply decide not to interact with some NPCs because they give you a weird vibe. That's it. You can choose completely from A to Z what your character does and how they do it. And how this is determined is usually by dice rolls. Just say you want to go up to a shopkeeper and you want to buy something. Just say you want to buy a couple of health potions, and they tell you it's 50 gold coins for those health potions. You can try and haggle with them, but now you're going to have to roll for persuasion, right? And that's usually done on a 20-sided die or a d20. And things like this are what set apart Dungeons and Dragons from most other games that at least I've played, because there's now that air of chance around the things that you're doing, right? So now you can fail that barter, or you could succeed it, or you may have to try again depending on what you roll. And I think that that's really exciting because it can open up opportunities for the different role play elements of the game, where if your character is really good at persuading people, you may be able to get a discount. So now you'll have more resources in the future to go buy other things, or maybe bribe someone in the future for something. That's really interesting to me. That's basically the main gameplay flow of the game is your dungeon master describes something to you, and then you as the player describe back to them what you do, and then the DM decides if you have to make a skill check for that or if you can just do that thing, if it is something that you can realistically do. And a lot of the times what's going to happen is you're going to get into a social interaction with an NPC, and this can either lead to a quest, or it can lead to combat, or it can lead to you learning extra information about whatever your main goal is going further into the campaign. It's just a very gratifying way to kind of give your players information without just giving them a list of quests and saying, okay, go do this thing. And I think that that works out very well for Dungeons and Dragons. What I love about the game personally for me is the combat. The combat in D&D is so simplistic but so surprisingly deep all at the same time that it leaves a lot of opportunity for you to get creative in how you fight your enemies and how you deal with certain things that may happen in combat. You have so many different weapons and weapon masteries and spells and different ways spells interact with different kinds of enemies and different combinations of abilities and spells and weapons that you can use to essentially just dominate the battlefield in any way you want. I think that that openness to creativity is what really makes D&D combat stand out to me as opposed to like other games combat and stuff like that. So I'm going to compare a lot of this stuff to video games because I've played a lot of video games in my time. I have not played a lot of TTRPGs in the past. Dungeons and Dragons is my first one. As compared to like something like Destiny or something like that, the amount of things you can do in that game with the different weapons and powers and stuff like that, the viable options are very limited. Whereas in Dungeons and Dragons, the viable options seem endless to me, right? Because you can make anything work in the game if you just give it a little bit of attention or you give it a little bit of a boost up, right? There's all of these different things that you can do with different magic and weapons, uh, and how the different classes will work with different weapons and magic and stuff like that. And I think it is just such a very interesting and, like I said, surprisingly deep combat, right? Because you'll have some enemies that are weak to a certain thing, or some that are resistant or even immune to another thing. Um, so maybe your character isn't going to be good at fighting a certain kind of enemy, but maybe one of your party members excels at fighting them because the way they built their character makes it so that they're dealing the damages that those enemies are weak to, or they have tactics that those enemies really are bad against. Um, and I think that finding out that balance as to who's good at what in your party as far as combat goes is really interesting because you might have someone that for the whole campaign, they're just really bad in combat. And that's okay. Not every character in Dungeons and Dragons has to be good at combat. Maybe they're bad at combat, but they excel at stealth or social interactions. Or maybe they're just really good at supporting the party while they're in combat, right? Whether that be via healing spells or buffing your party's damage or armor or anything like that. Every character is good at something, and finding out what that character is good at is a really fun little experience to have, right? Because you can purposely go out of your way to make it so that your character, yes, is bad at combat, but you can make it so that they never have to get into combat because they can talk themselves out of any situation. Or maybe if there's a situation you can't talk your way out of, maybe you're able to stealth your way around that situation so that you don't even have to, confront the enemies that would have wanted to fight you. Finding out these things in combat or finding ways around combat in a creative and fun way is one of the things that stands out so much to me about D&D. Because like I said about video games, there is usually a scripted way you're supposed to do things. Like, hey, you're allowed to stealth through this section. You're not allowed to stealth through this section. Dungeons and Dragons is very open where you can stealth through whatever you want, essentially, as far as I understand. You can stealth through pretty much anything you want, or you can make anything into a combat, or you can make anything into a social interaction. Um, and to bring it back to a game like Destiny, that's an RPG game where you're never going to do stealth because stealth isn't a mechanic in the game. And that feels very limiting, right? Because how does every enemy know where you are as soon as you enter the room? In Dungeons and Dragons, not every enemy knows that you're there because if you're outside the castle and you sneak your way in and you enter a room that's full of guards, how on earth would they know you're there? If you weren't seen, you didn't make noise, you didn't, you know, how would they know you're there? And that's what's interesting to me is the fact that in a realistic way, you're interacting with the world, but the world is also interacting back with you in the sense of, yeah, you entered this enemy base in a stealthy manner. Nobody knows you're there because you did that. Or in the case of the opposite, right? If you and your party bum rush the gates and you're killing guards and you're blowing stuff up, you're lighting things on fire. Yeah, yeah, you drew some attention. Everyone knows you're here now. And I think that that makes a lot of sense. Everyone knows you're there because you made a lot of noise and you just killed a bunch of people. And I like how it feels like the world is playing back with you. Because realistically it is, right? Because that dynamic between dungeon master and players is your dungeon master playing with the party. Um so that kind of dynamic where it feels like everything kind of makes sense, right? Your actions have consequences, but they're not just consequences for the sense of having consequences. They're consequences that make a logical bit of sense. That is another thing that I just love about the game. Now, while there are certain aspects of the gameplay that I like less than others, I don't particularly hate any of it, right? So, what I dislike about D&D, right? I dislike doing stealth. Not because stealth is intrinsically a bad option to do. In Dungeons and Dragons, it can often be a really fun option to do. But for me, harkening back to video games, in a game like Dishonored or Assassin's Creed or insert stealth game here, right? You're able to dispatch enemies instantly if you're in stealth, right? You're able to knock them out or perform a stealth kill or stuff like that. You're able to do these things because you're in stealth. In Dungeons and Dragons, it's not like that. If you're in an area that is populated by enemies and you're trying to stealth your way through it, the only option that you have that is realistic is to completely avoid contacting anybody. Because if you try to do a stealth kill or you try to knock someone out, you're going to have to do a check. You're either for knocking someone out, right? Putting them in a chokehold and knocking them out. You're probably going to have to do a strength check. And if you fail that, they're going to get out of your chokehold and they're going to, make a bunch of noise. They're going to make a scene. And now your entire stealth section is completely flubbed. Um, if you try to assassinate them, right? You're probably going to have to make like a dexterity check, right? And if you fail that, then you don't get to kill the guard. Or your DM could be like, okay, well, how much damage does your melee weapon do that you're trying to, assassinate them with? And then you're only going to do that much damage. So it puts a kind of a gap in what I was talking about before with the realistic way that the world interacts with you. It puts that gap there where if someone doesn't see you and they don't know you're there, they're realistically not going to put up a fight if you act quick enough. Um, so if you quick grabbed a guard and choked them out, they're not going to be able to do anything really if you don't mess up astronomically. I just don't like that you have to completely avoid all enemies when you try to do stealth. I think that that's a really lame way of doing it. Um, but as far as I know, that is the only way of doing it in D&D is completely avoid the guards or you completely screw up the stealth section because that's the only way it's been presented to me so far. Another thing that I dislike is just say you make a character that is really, really good at combat. and every time you're in combat, you completely mop the floor with your DM's enemies, right? That they throw at the party. And you're doing really good and it's going great. It is a really souring experience to have your DM target your character in an unrealistic way. So for example, right, if you're if you have multiple party members kind of in the same area when you start combat and the enemy goes first, if the enemies all go after just that character that's doing well, that is not realistic in a sense, right? Because all of the party members, if one party member is being attacked, clearly all of the aggressive enemies are aggressive to the whole party. That's how it's supposed to be. If your DM is just trying to attack the one party member, that's number one, unfair. Number two, unrealistic. And number three, that's not the enemies doing that. That's your DM doing that. I don't like when DMs punish players for playing in a way that the DM doesn't like. Because the same would be going for the opposite. If you're a dungeon master that really enjoys the combat and you want your party to fight, that would be like punishing your party for just talking through situations instead of fighting with, unrealistic skill checks or making it so that nobody in the world can be rationalized with as your players are playing through the campaign. That's not a realistic way of looking at things, and that's not a realistic way of running things. And if you're running things like that, you're actively making it so that you put a gap there for your players to have strife with not only how the game is being run, but having strife and discourse with you as a dungeon master. And the same could go the opposite way, right? If your dungeon master has had these conversations with you as to like, hey, I don't like the way you're playing this. I think it's very out of tone for the campaign, or I whatever the case may be. If they have a conversation with you, you as the player should not retaliate against them by doing that thing or doing that thing worse, right? I don't think that no matter what role in the game you're playing, I don't think you should retaliate against other people because someone didn't like what you're doing or you don't like what someone else is doing. Have a conversation as adults as to what your gripe is and come to a compromise with each other as to how you can fix that for the game moving forward. Because at the end of the day, it is a game that is meant to be fun for everybody at the table. And if people are bickering and arguing and fighting at the table, it is not fun. Those are my main gripes with the game, though. And those are all very fixable issues, in my opinion. Uh, for for the prior issue stated about um, DMs and players, kind of having a disagreement, just talk to each other, right? For Dungeons and Dragons stealth, maybe either find a way to kind of homebrew a solution where maybe you can stealth take down the guards, but maybe make it so that you have now, if you stealth take down a guard, right, you knock them out. Maybe make it so that now you have like a time limit for like, hey, this guard's gonna wake up because all you did was choke them out. They're gonna wake up soon. So if you don't get in and get out, do what you have to do, they're gonna wake up and they're gonna alert everybody. I think that that's a realistic way of looking at it. Another thing I kind of dislike about the game is what I think every player fears when they try to, role play their character in an effective way, or they try to do things that their character should be excellent at, is the unrealistic skill check, right? And this doesn't have to be a case of your DM is, out for your character or you know, they have something against you. It doesn't have to be like that. A lot of newer dungeon masters I've seen do this, and it can get really frustrating where you make your party do skill checks over everything, which shouldn't be the case. As per D&D's Dungeon Master Guide, I'm pretty sure has it in there, where if your character can realistically do something, you should probably just let them do it. So, for example, climbing a ladder. Ladders are meant to be climbed by everyday normal people. And since it is a task that can be done by everyday normal people that don't have the crazy dexterity stats and strength stats and this, that, and the next stat that your player characters have, it is realistic to say that you can just climb that ladder, right? Because the saves are meant to kind of make a decision in an unbiased way for stuff that isn't certain, right? So, for example, something that wouldn't be certain is if there's a 10-foot gap, right? And you have to jump across it. That's when you would roll a save because it's not certain that you make it across, right? Your foot could slip on trying to upon trying to jump. You could fall backwards on landing on the other side. You can just straight up not jump far enough. There's all of these different things to consider that lead to a certain uncertainty in that circumstance. Those are when checks should be had. Not trying to open an unlocked door, not trying to climb a ladder, not trying to walk up the stairs. There's an infinite amount of things that I've seen people make their party roll for that they simply should not have to roll for. Right? So, like, for example, I've seen people have to make perception checks as to what a person looks like that they're talking to. Um, that's unrealistic. If you are standing there talking face to face with someone, you know what they look like. So I don't think you should have to roll for perception because you're actively looking at this person and speaking with them. I think maybe if you wanted to do something like that where it's like, hey, what is their body language like? Okay, maybe then you can do perception because reading body language is a perception type of thing. But not just for, hey, do I perceive this person is talking to me during the conversation we're in? No, I think that that's foolish. I think that's silly. Um, so the unnecessary skill check can just is also another issue that can just kind of be settled by don't spam skill checks for every single thing the party does. Sometimes you can just let your characters do stuff. You can just let the players do the thing they wanted to do. It is fine. It's not going to kill anybody. I promise. Now for the question of why has D&D taken up so much of my time? Regardless of the things that I dislike about the game, for me the upsides far outweigh the downsides. D&D can be anything you want it to be with any setting you want to have, whatever story type you want to have, in whatever time period you want it to be in. And I think that that's awesome. And I like making characters in these worlds that feel like they actually came from that setting. It A lot of the roleplay stuff in the game I didn't think I would like. I didn't think I would like acting like a character in a game, but I did. I really did. And it opens up a lot of creativity to be like, okay, well, how would this character act to this? I know how I would act in a situation like they're in, but how would they act in a situation they're in? And I think that that's a cool little mental exercise to kind of put yourself through in the sense of it makes you look at things from maybe a perspective you wouldn't look at them in your normal everyday life. Um, I also just like making characters that feel powerful in a certain way, right? Like maybe they're not powerful in the traditional way, right? Where they're like super strong or like something like that. Uh, but maybe they're just really able to talk to people. Like people just do what they ask because they have just that certain charm to them. A character like that can be really interesting to play. Or maybe you do want to play as a character that is powerful in the traditional way. Like maybe they're really good at magic, right? Maybe they're just like a really strong soldier or wizard or caster of some sort. Whatever it may be, it is just really fun to play as someone that is just awesome at a thing or awesome at a bunch of things. It's cool to play as characters that are the exceptions in the setting that they're put in, right? Because not everybody in Dungeons and Dragons is an adventurer. There are also just normal people. So being able to kind of be the pinnacle of what those people can be, I think is really cool. And I think that it is such a driving force to want to keep playing the game because I want to see in how many different ways can you make a character be completely different or completely or like just better in different stuff. I think it's a cool thing to think about and it's stuff that I want to learn more about. Which kind of leads me into my next thing is I'm still very new to Dungeons and Dragons in the grand scheme of things. There are people that have played Dungeons and Dragons since it came out in the 70s. I don't know a fraction of what those people know. And I think that's fine. But I want to keep playing this and I want to keep learning about this. And I want to, as I'm learning, help you learn the game as well. So whenever I learn something, so will you. I want to make videos kind of formatted like this, but on more specific topics, right? Instead of what is D&D or how do we play it and things like that. I want to get more specific with that, right? Talking about classes in particular, like the paladin or barbarian or the wizard or the cleric or druid, things like that. And then we can even get more specific as to a specific subclass in those classes, right? Like like the berserker barbarian or the oath of devotion paladin. We can get as specific as we need to be able to really get an in-depth look at these different characters. Or we can even go into, I keep saying or, I mean and, we can go into specific game mechanics, right? Like the cover system or high ground, or we can go into how social interactions are supposed to go in different contexts. I want to learn more about the game, and that's what I want to share with you. Thank you all so much for watching to the end of the video. It means more to me than you can ever know. Please don't forget to leave a like on the video. Please subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Later.
Atenção, 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 atenção.